A lot of people have asked me to do a series on how to listen to Indian classical music. The earlier part was dedicated to listening to the South Indian classical music form or Carnatic music. I was sharing my experiences, and this part is all about how I listen to Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet or the North Indian classical music form. In the North Indian classical music form, I'm going to be specifically talking about listening to vocalists performing khyals. The first thing that I notice in a live performance, if I'm listening to one, is how they are tuning the tanpura, because most of the times we can see artists tuning tanpura as part of the videos, and I try and listen to if I can pick up the sound of the tanpura and see what adjustments they are making, what fine tuning are they trying to make. It's very difficult, but some of the videos you can kind of make out. So that's one thing that I really pay attention to. And the moment they begin their performance, I listen to how they're taking their very first note in the concert, because especially in Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet, when the singer begins, everybody is most of the times, just giving the shadaj, whether it's a harmonium player or a sarangi player, they're just playing very lightly the shadaj, or maybe the nishad if the artist is starting with the nishad. But the singer's voice is what first very prominently hits the audience, the auditorium. So I listen to the way the first note is sung, how they're taking it, the kind of breath they're taking before the first note and beginning to sing their very first note of the concert. That is something that I really pay attention to, because trust me, it's very hard. When it's absolute silence and perfectly tuned tanpuras playing, and you start with one single note, to have a steady voice with utmost calmness and to begin the concert with just that one note is very difficult. So I pay attention to that and see how artists do that. And then most of the times we realize that the artists are also checking their sound and feedback and all of that. So to cater to that, I look at how artists plan their next phrase. How are they doing it? Is it like just two notes, or are they taking a phrase to establish the rag? So these are the things that I notice. Again, the space between the phrases, is it a long pause? Are they breathing in, taking the aura of the rag, or is it they're just going with the flow and doing phrase one after the other? So I pay attention to that. When they start the bandish, I definitely make a note of the tempo or the lay in which they are taking that particular bandish. If it's a bandish that I already know, I definitely make sure I make a note of the speed in which the artist is taking the bandish, because the same bandish could be sung at a madhyalay speed by some artists, or some artists take it in ati vilambit. So the temperament and the mood of the bandish greatly vary with the speed in which they're singing it. So I definitely make a note of that, make a note of which speed they're beginning the bandish at. And the same bandish by the same artist is definitely sung differently in every concert when they're establishing the original tune of the bandish. So I also listen to that, and I'm aware of how they're spacing the words out, and sometimes it's a little fast, sometimes it's too slow. So based on that, without the audience realizing all this, they do the magic, and they weave a beautiful um, picture out of the sthais, original tune of the bandish. So I pay attention to that. And then once they take the alap, is it all akar, or are they starting directly with the bol alaps, or are they mixing the words and the alap and singing, doing the improvisation? I make a note of that. Another thing that I make a note is, of course, there is one approach where you do note by note, you improvise, you take one note, of course, according to the grammar of the raga. You take that note, improvise, and then move over to the next note, and then you do ascending phrases, then you do zigzag phrases, then you do one lead descent. So these are all methods of improvising any rag or any bandish. Some artists, you know, they might essentially not follow all these steps in the same order, but they might, just create so much aura or so much magic in the rag that you forget all this, and you're so drawn into the raga. uh, that happens many times. So what I do is I rewind, go back to the same place, and I like pay extra attention to it. So that's that point where I'm switching from a student of music to a listener who loves this art form. So when I notice that I'm, ending up just listening to it and being drawn by the music, I go back, rewind, and then, begin from the same point at which I thought I kind of moved over to this part of listening from being a, student listener. So coming back, that's one thing that I pay attention to. And how are they slowly transitioning from the sthai to the antara? Is it, are they doing like Nisha, then the tar saptak ka range? Are they doing that and then establishing the tar sharaj, or are they doing like nishad and then directly to the tar sharaj? I observe all that. And how are they seamlessly taking the antara? A lot of times, we don't even notice that they've moved from the sthai to the antara, but so much transition has happened. So I notice how they're seamlessly going over to the tar saptak range and mainly taking the antara. And once this section is over, I definitely pay attention to the increase in lay or the increase in speed that the artist is doing. Is it like a, quite a jump between the ati vilambit or the vilambit to the madhya lay, or is it a very gradual transition? I make a note of that as well. And of course, then see how they're taking the sargams. Is it like in the same pace, or are they doubling the tempo? Or are they taking improvisation with the words? These are other things that I notice. And at the same time, see how despite doing all these technical improvisations, how they are retaining and establishing the feel of the raga consistently and continuously. So that is another thing that I definitely notice while I'm listening to Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet. And most importantly for me, how are they emoting every word? As you improvise, after a point in time, it's just not about, singing Rag Yaman or singing Rag Kedar. It's a picture that you're painting or a story that you're trying to narrate through your voice. So, how are they emoting every word or every phrase? The same pia could be sung in 100 odd ways. So, how different are they doing it every time and in every concert? So, this is another thing that I see, and the tonality of the voice. Coming to the voice culture, how is the voice sounding in the lowest range and how is the voice sounding in the highest range? The uniformity in the voice, and how's the voice sounding while it's an extremely slow phrase, and how is the same voice sounding when the artist is taking a super fast tan, or an extremely fast phrase. Tans are nothing but really really fast phrases. So I noticed that to see how the voice is uniform and the tonal quality is uniform across the spectrum. That's another thing that I notice. And voice modulation, the loud soft in the singing, and how are they emoting with this voice modulation? And when you take especially Drit Ektal compositions, a lot of times you don't have the space to take a breath before you finish the entire cycle of the sthai or the antara. So where are they actually breathing, and how are they taking it effectively, and making it sound beautiful and making it sound unhurried? That's another thing that I notice for. Because especially when in Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet, by the time you go over to the sections of doing sargams and tans, you are singing at a really fast pace. But at the same time, the artists don't make it sound hurried. So there is still the calmness and unhurried nature present. At the same time, they're singing it in really fast speeds. So I make a note of that as well, and I pay attention to that. And again, like the the measure, the appropriateness, how much of tans are they doing before they close the composition or close the bandish at the right juncture when the audience is wanting more, you can find artists, they close down the composition or the bandish. So that's a very, very key point. And how are they doing like their final thans or the sargams, and how they actually beautifully conclude the piece. That's another thing that I pay attention to. And of course, moving over to semi-classical compositions in Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet. Say if it was a thumri, again I pay attention to the emotions that they convey through their singing, and the kind of improvisations the artist does in order to convey the emotion differently, in the sense to give it variety. And the words that they pick to do these improvisations is another thing that I make a note of, and I stay very aware of while I'm listening to Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet. If it was a bhajan, of course I listen to the original tune and how they add on improvisations to the existing tune, and where they take breaks and take an alap, say Ram or Krishna or Ram Bhajo, whatever the words are. So where do they take a break and do the alaps, or take the words and do the improvisation? These are other things that I definitely make a note of. And when it comes to regional pieces, like say for example Nati Geet of from the Marathi region, or Bhav Geets, then I definitely make sure I go through word to word meaning before I listen to this piece, and or before I try and learn this piece, because the places at which the artist would have taken the improvisations would be highly meaningful. So I make sure I know what the meaning of every word is, and the entire composition's meaning, so that when I try and do the improvisation, when I practice those improvisations, I know that I'm taking the right word and trying to improvise on those words or on those phrases. So these are some things that I usually do while I listen to Indian classical music. So I hope students of music would could probably take one or two points from my experience of listening to Indian classical music.